Welcome. If you'd like to take your seats, we'd like to begin, please. Welcome to our second leadership seminar series at Marymount California University. I'd like to welcome our guests, our students, faculty, some staff, and our speakers tonight. Thank you very much. This is our opportunity to explore some of the themes in leadership that our graduate students are learning about currently in their coursework, and a time to bring the Marymount community together to benefit from what we're teaching. My name is Eric Lowe. I'm the admissions counselor and advisor for the graduate program at Marymount University, which includes our MBA students, our students in community psychology, as well as leadership and global development. So, on behalf of all of us, thank you so much. Just a little bit of a mention about our programs. We started in fall of 2013 with leadership and community psych, and we opened up an MBA program in the fall of this year. Our inaugural class is in attendance, and we also opened up an opportunity for students in Africa to take part in the MBA program that we're offering here. So we are truly a global school, and I'd like to invite you at the beginning of next month on the 4th, we're going to hold an info session for those of you interested in our MBA program, in our community psych, and in our leadership program. So we will have more information about that soon. Without further ado, I'm going to invite Dr. Michael Brophy to take the microphone from me so that he can begin our lecture. Thank you.
Always good to see your big smiling face, Eric. Always make people smile, and also glad to hear your thoughts on the graduate program, which is growing so quickly. We do, however, want to begin tonight remembering where we are and when we are, as where we are and the time that we're in. Remembering what one of our speakers said last time, that we're all here in Palos Verdes tonight because there were men and women, and there are men and women who have sacrificed so much, including their lives in some cases, for us to be this free country. We want to recognize the veterans in the audience. Any veterans, please stand. Thank you, Art.
I'm really glad to be here, but there are so many unfortunate veterans that have returned. We owe so much to do all we can to push that down in the field and make things happen. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your warm support.
Lots of friends in the room want to recognize some of those folks. We have at least 2 alumni of our Leadership Speaker Series. We're in our 3rd year actually doing this, I think, in our 3rd year. And this is the 2nd this fall. We have Mr. Mitch Harmatz. Mitch, please stand. And I think Mr. Lee Liggins is here. Lee? I recognize one of our board members who's here tonight, Dr. Sue Soloff. Sue was at the creation of our graduate programs many years ago. It was a great mind and helped us quite a bit think this through. We have our graduate students. Graduate students, please stand. Be recognized. Professor Folletta and I, we have some students here from our freshman seminar who can stand. Those folks from freshman seminar, please stand. Of course, we love all our students, so let's have all of our outstanding students stand. Please, all of our students, please stand and be recognized by our community. Stand. Artie, would you stand back, Artie? How about the soccer team? You guys stand? Okay, all right. You're in Palos Verdes this Thursday. Stop by at 11 a.m., right? Our men's soccer team is seated first in the conference, and they're playing home game at Maryland Stadium against...
You see the set?
UC Merced. I'm really glad to have you here tonight. You're going to really enjoy the evening. The format, as many of you know, is really straightforward. We spend about half of our time, 30, 40 minutes, just in dialogue with the three speakers and myself. At some point during that time, our staff will come around and ask you if you'd like to write down questions you might have for our speakers. And then those cards come forward to myself, and I share those questions with our guests. Let's welcome tonight Arlie Baker. Arlie Baker, sitting right here, good friend of the university for many years, serves on our San Pedro Advisory Council. Arlie oversees day-to-day media relations, public relations, advertising, and graphic services team as Deputy Executive Director of Communications at the Port of Los Angeles.
He has a very cool watch. So
And he has a cool watch, yes. Previously, Arlie served as Vice President at the Corporate Consumer Practice at Los Angeles public relations firm Rogers & Cohen, a division of Weber Shandwick, worldwide. He brings to the Port of LA a broad variety of communications expertise garnered from nearly 2 decades of serving a variety of organizations worldwide, including Bank of America, United Airlines, and the American Suzuki Motor Corporation. Welcome to our campus, Arlie. Caroline Brown comes to us today, Director of Global Trade and Supply Chain Solutions for Bank of America Merrill Lynch. Caroline is instrumental in leveraging Bank of America Merrill Lynch's core competency in global trade and supply chain, knowledge and best practices among industry-leading importers and exporters, and a focus on working capital optimization and risk mitigation. Prior to joining Bank of America Merrill Lynch in 2013, Brown was first Vice President of Comerica's International Trade Finance Department and co-chair of its Western Market African American Initiative. She's also served as Director at the California Office of Export Finance and Acting Director of the California Office of Export Development. I believe this is your first visit to our campus. Our big welcome for Caroline. And I'm very glad to have here tonight a fellow member of International Young Presidents Organization, YPO. In fact, I think John was our chapter president 1 year. John Bain, founding partner and CEO of MarketShare, the leading cloud-based big data analytics and software company that helps companies grow more efficiently by identifying what is really driving demand. Earlier in his career, John served as Chief Operating Officer of Michael Ovitz's AMG, Artist Management Group, and APG, Artist Production Group, overseeing all divisions, including talent, literary, animation, sports, music, publishing, and feature film production. Before attending law school, he utilized his engineering and computer science background as a practicing engineer on the space program at Hughes Electronics and Teledyne Relays. Again, I want to welcome a close friend of the campus, John Bain, to Marymount. So many of you know we try to start the program getting a sense of the background of our speakers and what their thoughts are on leadership attributes, leadership theory, and really try to understand where their philosophy on leadership is drawn from, personal and professional. So our first question, Arlie, is pretty straightforward. Arlie, is there something, at least one thing you can think of in your background, professional background, that was formative for you in terms of leadership? An experience where you can look at it and say you learned something about leadership, either from a personal experience or even watching a mentor or someone else.
Well, I think early on what helped me when I was growing up was that my parents owned a business, and as part of growing up in a family business, I was able to interact a lot with the public customers. I was selling stuff, so I think the salesmanship part of leadership and being able to sell a story and bring people along with your vision was something that I had a knack of, very early, and I think the turning point in terms of really putting myself out there was probably 15 years into my career. I had a very stepstone career. I started my career working as an account coordinator in an advertising agency, and just hustling, and you work your way up through this account management, chains that you go from account coordinator to assistant account executive to account executive, this and that. And it's all very methodical, and you kind of move yourself up, and you move around from different companies to different companies, and you get jobs based on your reputation and based on someone who can say, yeah, I know him, does great work. But after 10 years ago, when I found out about the port job in public affairs, that was probably a turning point for me in terms of just putting myself out there. I literally did not know anyone at the port, in the harbor area. I didn't have anyone who was paving the way for me to be there. It was a public sector job after 15 years in the private sector. And that was probably the turning point for me, because I had...
Did that feel risky?
Oh yeah. I mean,
Also-
that's probably the big thing, because you get to this point in your career where you're just like, well, I'm just gonna follow my instincts and do what I do, and if I lose my job, then so be it. And I think that when we read about leaders, people like Steve Jobs, they weren't afraid of failing and losing their job, and it was just putting themselves out there and in a way that on a plane that they had never been on before. And I think that was the big thing, where I was here, I was at the port, I didn't come from global trade, I came from the consumer industry, and I was able to kind of forge a reputation, just basically with my skills and kind of having a stock in trade in terms of being a communicator, which I am at heart, I'm a storyteller. So that was probably the turning point that I remember, where things just kind of kicked in, and the training wheels came off my bicycle, so to speak.
You still on that bicycle?
Still, I was looking at my bicycle, and I'm like, I gotta get a new bike.
John, you've worked, as the audience knows, you've worked in 3 very different sectors, and I think it's probably hard for you to pick just one, but is there one formative experience, again, something you saw, something you experienced that really, when you need to, you reach back to when you think of in terms of leadership?
Well, I think that there's, I have one experience I'll relate in a second, but I think there's a handful of themes. So as you mentioned, I ran a pretty big animation company. We produced shows like The Simpsons and Family Guy, so that was one sector. I ran a talent management company where we represented a lot of big stars like Leonardo DiCaprio and Cameron Diaz and so forth. And now I run a company that's a technology company that out of our 450 employees, 50 are PhDs in statistics. So it's very, the other side of the brain. I guess a couple of things. The first 2 companies that I ran, other people started. The third one started from scratch. So part of, I think one of the kind of pivotal things was really kind of taking, not that I didn't take ownership in any of it, but really feeling, I think, a greater sense of both responsibility and pride in starting something from scratch. But I think the common themes that I found across the board are, one is sort of grace under pressure. I think there's a balance when you've got the livelihoods of a lot of people sort of kind of hanging in the balance. On the one hand, you want to communicate certainty and confidence, but on the other hand, you can't be so much of a cheerleader that you're disingenuous. You have to be honest with people. I would say that one experience that I had, which really kind of reinforced the way I thought not to do things. Well, let me cover one little quick thing. is, I think the most important attribute of any executive or leader is knowing what you don't know. I try to drill that both into myself and into my team. Hire people who are smarter than you in areas that you need help in, and acknowledge what you don't know. I think that is critical, and I think it's a big flaw in some people. The one real brief experience I'll give is I went to one of the people whose company I eventually ran, and I walked in one day, and I said, "We've got 350 people here, and it must be so gratifying to walk in every day and see that the livelihoods of these people and their families are here because you have this great idea." And his answer was, "Well, if they weren't working for me, they'd be working for someone else." And my heart dropped. And I carry the exact opposite point of view. Every day I walk into the office now, I really do feel a sense of responsibility on what can I do to make their lives better. Of course, our customers' lives better and everything else, but I think that having that sense of ownership, not in the monetary sense, but in the emotional sense, is something that I learned sort of backwards from the intro that I got.
Excellent. Caroline, something the well that you turn to maybe at some point during your week or year, something from the past that you reminded of in terms of leadership?
Yeah, I kind of reached back to a time when I left the private sector and went into the public sector for a government appointment, which was kind of risky because you work at the pleasure of the governor, and so you never know when that's going to end or begin, but you're trying new things. And so I was a commercial lender and worked for a bank at the time, and so I thought I was changing over into something that was relatively comfortable because I was working with small businesses. They were exporters, which was a little different than Twist, but it was relatively comparable to what I had been doing before. But during that time, things really changed a lot because I went in a relatively short period of time from being a loan officer, working with clients, trying to help them get financing, to running 2 state agencies. I ran the Office of Export Finance and the Office of Export Development. And on the finance side, we would give guarantees to banks to help small businesses. So they would take risks on companies that they normally wouldn't do business with because they were a little too scary. They were dealing with people that they didn't know very well overseas and concerned that if they got paid, would they get paid on time, and then would they pay them back. And then I was working on the export development side with helping companies look for those new leads, whether they be domestic foreign buyer missions coming inbound or foreign trade shows that were specific to their agency or their industry. And what ended up happening during that term is that we went through several different administrations, and we had a governor that was recalled and a tremendous deficit in the state budget, and the agency got sunsetted and basically went away. And so in the meantime, we had, I was running 4 offices and was responsible for 30, 40 employees, and so we had to find homes for people, we had to help companies through that, and so I really had to kind of dig deep into things that I understood and knew and try to assist them through this challenging time, so that's kind of what I did back
Caroline, our students, when they study leadership, naturally at some point get to the conversation about nature versus nurture. And it's always a good conversation, a good debate. Are people born leaders, or are people trained or they mentored to become leaders? But what's your experience on the nature versus nurture conversation?
I guess I'd probably work, for both, and certainly for people that have different leadership styles. But I think for me, it's something that's kind of inert. I studied psychology and in school at USC, and it was interesting that I ended up getting into banking and finance, something completely different. But I think those skills of learning how to work with people serves me well as I'm working with clients. If I go in to meet with them, I can tell pretty quickly if there's someone that just wants to deal with the facts and get down to business and deal with numbers, or if I need to talk about their kids' pictures that I'm looking at, or the soccer awards that they're seeing on the walls. And so it's about building rapport. And so I found that just, my love for people and wanting to work with people and get to know them better serves me well. And so I think that's something that's kind of innate to me.
Have you ever been mentored by someone who you would look back and you say that person was a born leader?
Born leader. I think so.
Or is it a fair theory to put forward that some people are born leaders?
I think that you can put put kids in a room and you'll find people that kind of gravitate to being the boss and kind of running things and organizing things. So I think it's pretty, something instinctual.
John, nature versus nurture.
I don't have a lot to add because I just think that there's a balance. I think that as Caroline said, you can walk into a group of kids and there's some that are just gonna, get people to gather around them. But I don't think that that alone is enough. I do think that you need, proper upbringing, proper values, proper education to support that.
Arlene?
Gosh, I agree with John and Caroline. For the most part, I think that there are some people that are born leaders, probably very few and far between. And as for the rest of us, we have to engender people to follow us, and whether we do it with pixie dust or with wonderful quotes or with hard work or just motivating them. There's a number of things that you can do to fuel interest in people following you. So for those of us that aren't born leaders, I think that you can affect a skill in terms of bringing people along, and that's really what leadership's all about. You're out there, you're the visionary, and people are following you.
Arlene, good question you bring up. What do you think is the biggest misunderstanding about leadership? When you hear people talk about leadership, what do you think they're missing?
Well, I think probably, when I was in college and I was a slacker, you'd look at leaders and you're like, well, that certainly could never be me. I think that.
Why was that?
Well, you might see someone who's a generation older than you, and you just can't relate to them, or you don't. Maybe they were someone that was a leader at a certain time, and they're known for their leadership at a certain time. And I think that while you can look to those people as great leaders, you shouldn't discount your own individual ability to be a leader. And being a leader doesn't mean having a title necessarily. There's a great book by Robin Sharma called Leadership Without Titles. And it really talks about certain traits that people can practice individually to become leaders. So I think that you can pretty much carve out your own affect of being a leader if you're really wanting to do that.
John, over the years, what would you say is the biggest misunderstanding about leadership? What is the most, when you hear it doesn't ring true?
I think that sometimes the term leadership suggests sort of a zero-sum game, that if somebody's a leader, somebody's necessarily a follower, and I think that I don't have CEO on my business card. Sometimes I have to say if I walk into a room just because you're in a big business meeting, but I think that good leaders inspire leadership and initiative in their team in the way that they are also leaders. So I don't know if that's too nuanced, but.
Yeah, and I would just add to that the most effective leaders that I've seen, there's not someone that's so wonderful, but it's someone that might bring out the best qualities in their team members to be able to bring a group together and listen, be an effective listener, not necessarily, giving direction of how they think it goes. Most of the time doesn't work very well. If you have your own isolated vision that you think, can be executed, it typically doesn't work unless people can buy into that and make it their vision as well. So it's a person who can look at each person and see what value they bring to the table, get them to buy into it, and take it the direction that they want it to go. So it's those people that can funnel that energy of others the best.
Caroline, can you take a moment? We're going to switch into the topic of the evening, global leadership. Can you just give folks a little more background on what your experience has been in working in the global economy? And then we'll come back later with some questions. So just to remind them what your experiences are. It sounds like it was out of Sacramento. And you had some experience there, but also in private as well.
Well, certainly I work with importers and exporters primarily. I've done that on the private sector as well as the public sector. But what I enjoy doing is working with businesses and trying to help them do things more effectively. If someone's an importer, they need financing to bring their product into the country, to be able to have financing to hold that inventory, sell it to their clients and wait to get paid. Usually they need money to get them through that trade cycle. On the export side, there's those companies that are building things. They need to do everything from find a buyer overseas that's interested in it, to build that to spec, and that takes money to hire people, to buy those raw materials, build it, and then ship it, and then wait to get paid. And on that side, it's very interesting because people are selling product to people they don't know. So they're concerned about who they're doing business with, if they're going to get paid, if they're going to get paid on time. And once their product is overseas, how do they get it back if they decide not to pay them? Or if they're selling produce, once it's over there, if they don't pay them, will it go bad by the time they find someone else to buy it? So there are lots of risks that go into trade, and so I spend a lot of time working with businesses to explain those risks and advantages to them, to tell them the things that they don't even know that they don't know yet, and make sure they have the right professionals around them to help them through it, whether it be in law or customs or logistics or financing. And not to wait till the last minute to think about those things until it's done.
Caroline, the audience is getting a sense of your work. What are the 2 or 3 countries that you think you work the most with, or help people work with the most?
Certainly being on the edge of the Pacific Rim or the gateway of the Pacific Rim, we see a lot with Asia. There's certainly a lot going on with China, a lot of change with China. It's gone from a low cost producer to basically someone we want to sell to with a strong building middle class. And I have clients that have been accustomed to selling in US dollar that are now looking at having to sell in renminbi, which is the currency in China, and dealing with some of the risks associated with that fluctuation of buying product and by the time they sell it, getting paid, and dealing with those currency fluctuations and possibly their profits going away with that risk that they took on. Yeah.
John, you've put together an impressive set of offices across the world. Give us folks a sense of the scope of your organization and what countries you're active in.
As I mentioned, we're about 450 people. Our clients are mostly multinational companies, so we do work in about 45 different countries. In terms of our offices, we have 8 offices around the world, and once a year I go visit all the offices. So on Saturday I'm off to Bangalore, Tokyo, London, coming back, literally going around the world. So we do a lot of work in different countries, and I think that other than the time differences that sometimes are a challenge, it's very odd. Bangalore to LA is an 11.5-hour time difference, which is just mind-boggling to me. Is being understanding and respectful that there are truly inherent cultural differences, and understanding those in your day-to-day job. I don't know if I can articulate specific ones, but they're real, and you have to recognize them.
You must work with some good number of countries around the world, at least in terms of partnerships or business and support.
Yeah, most of the ports trading nations, the top 5 are all Asia, and China is like the largest, and then the number 2, 3, and 4 are they don't even total what China trades with us. So,
And what countries are those?
it's China, South Korea, Japan, what is it? Taiwan, and Vietnam, Taiwan. So, and when it comes to, as John was saying, when it comes to meeting people from different nations, you always have to have a dark suit, and present your card with both hands, and really study the card that's being presented to you. So we do a lot of interaction with the Pacific Rim countries, but also because the Port of LA is known for, among other things, environmental stewardship and security. We do a lot of interaction with ports in Europe, Rotterdam, Hamburg, and it's really an environment of, every port is different. There's no two ports that are identical. So when you're talking about the ports as an industry, there's a lot to learn, and you have to have the mindset that, sure, the Port of LA is the largest container port in the Western Hemisphere, but we are very far behind in a lot of other pieces of seaborne trade. So you always have to approach your colleagues in other countries as someone who's a peer, and you're there to learn from them as they are there to learn from you.
One thing I would add to my earlier comment about sort of culture, and I don't want to overly generalize, but there's some countries where I know that if I'm talking to somebody on the other side of the deal, they're going to tell you exactly what they're thinking. And it obviously varies person to person, but if I wanted to say when I walk into a room in the countries, I'm pretty sure that what I hear is what they mean. In others, there's a great deal of politeness, and they may have no interest in doing business with you, and you might walk out saying, that was the greatest meeting ever, and then you'll never get a phone call back again. My earlier comment was about the team ourselves and how the different cultural differences, but doing business across the table, across different regions is very, very different.
Caroline, just to move into the export question a little bit and leadership, I'm assuming you have a good number of domestic companies who've done very well successfully domestically, but now want to export. What are some of the key things as you help learn them about this setting and teach them? What are the key leadership things that you remind them of as they begin to think about moving a very successful enterprise domestically into an international ambition?
Well, there's so many exporters that have, great products, especially if they've created something wonderful, that they're out there trying to sell it primarily. And they're just looking for that first contract, and a lot of times they'll carve out that contract before they'll talk to their trade professionals, and that's the worst thing they can do. Because,
why is that?
Because there's costs that are involved in that, and there are different nuances, things that they need to consider. For example, I had a client that was selling a large piece of equipment that took 9 months to build. And so they have to think about how they're going to get paid for that product. So they negotiated a letter of credit, which seemed like a very safe way to get paid. And so they're, some of the things that I was talking to them about is who's the bank that's issuing the letter of credit? What's the country? How comfortable are you with that bank? Do you need to have that letter of credit confirmed from a U.S. bank? Are they going to give you, is that customized product that you can't sell to someone else? So you go out and buy all the raw materials and then you can't sell it to anyone else because it's private label. So how about getting a deposit up front for that product? And then if they ask for a deposit up front, that client might want to guarantee that they're going to get their down payment back. So all of those things cost money and take time. And if they wait until the 11th hour, when the contract is done, it's too late. And so a lot of companies make the mistake of doing all that first, and their profits are down to nothing by the time they're done with the contract because, it's just gone away with fees and costs and time. Or they aren't even able to meet the conditions of the contract any longer because there isn't a ship that's going out in time to meet the latest shipping date, or something like they didn't price it accordingly. They may have won the contract because they were the lowest bidder, but they were the lowest bidder for a reason because they didn't build in the cost that they needed to. So understanding those issues long before you finalize anything can make the difference of being successful and not successful.
And what does it take for a leader to appreciate what does he or she need to do to understand that the horizon for closing a contract may be much longer internationally if they follow your advice? than domestically. What do you have to remind them of? What are the lessons they've learned over that period? Because it sounds like it could be months or years.
I think some of the clients get a feel for how long it takes to close a contract because, you know, with the beauty of the internet, people are finding them all over the place. And so they get these leads that, depending on where it's located, can take a long time to get to the point where it looks like it's real. But it's just important to start having those conversations with the professionals around you early. Like, for example, some of the contracts require a warranty bond or something at the end of a contract. You know, and if they're selling to the Middle East, I'm going to always caution them, you need to make sure your profits are before that last 10%, because chances are you may not get that 10%. At the end of the contract, they'll want to renegotiate that contract, because that's the way that they tend to do business sometimes. And so they're just things that people need to know depending on what area of the world they're dealing with. And so they just have to, if it sounds like it's getting real, start bringing in your professionals so they can alert you to some of the things that you're not thinking about.
What do you, just in this modern age, we think that so many things can be done on the internet in terms of communication and negotiation. At what point do you advise people to do the face-to-face? Is it the beginning?
That cannot be
Is it the
replaced.
end?
Building a relationship with someone is paramount. You can't do that over the phone. You can't. I mean, if you're selling some off-the-shelf widget, perhaps, but you know, especially in like Latin America and in Asia too. I mean, it's all about relationships. I think around the world, it's about relationships. So getting out there, meeting them, knowing who you're doing business with, can mean having a successful order and not.
Now, knowing who you might be working with, you know, people who are very busy and have a hard time even carving out a week.
Yeah.
How do you convince them to, as leaders, to make that sacrifice or that investment?
There's lots of cost-effective ways to do that. For example, the U.S. Department of Commerce and Commercial Service, they have what's called Gold Key services. They'll help them find potential buyers or distributors. They'll also set up meetings at the embassies for them with potential distributors. They also have foreign buyer missions where people are coming in country that they can meet with them. So there's ways to Skype and do all kinds of interesting things to try to establish rapport, but getting to know them, getting foreign credit reports, knowing who their bankers are. There's lots of ways to try to protect yourself and doing business with someone you don't know very well.
John? This looks like it's triggered some thoughts for you.
Yeah, I mean, while relationships are paramount, full stop, in addition to that, the mode of communication is critical, because even if you have a relationship with somebody, I always say the worst thing you can do, unless it's absolutely necessary, is email, because you don't have a sense of the cadence, what people are saying, and for better or worse, I think it's human nature to be suspicious when you read the email. People tend to look at it in a negative way as opposed to what might be meant. The next level up is phone call, the next level up is video conference, and then you can't beat face-to-face, just because when you see body language and you have a better understanding of where someone's coming from, it helps obviate unnecessary miscommunication. So.
John, you have an office in Bangalore. You hire someone from the U.S. to work in an office, a leader. What is the advice you give them about leadership in that setting? Just, you know, broad strokes.
Well, we do it, fortunately, both directions. We've had some of our leadership from Bangalore move to the U.S. to get a better sense of what we're doing and be closer to sort of the mothership. And then after a couple of years, they may well go back. And then we usually have people from the U.S. go to our Bangalore office. It's really as much about listening as explaining, making sure that it's a dialogue, not a monologue.
You get the same advice?
Both directions, yeah.
And you've worked, without naming names, you work on behalf of some pretty big companies, international companies. What is, maybe without naming names, what are some of the biggest mistake you've seen a multinational, you know, a gold-plated multinational company make in your very specific field, this marketing research? What, again, just a sense of the leadership mistake they made.
Well, there's two or three. One is silos. So you typically have in a lot of companies, you've got your marketing department, and your finance department, your sales department. To quote one of the CFOs of one of my very large, probably Fortune 10 clients. When he added up the ROIs of each of the different silos of the company, it was twice as big as it actually was. So understanding that all these things work together, and so structurally, I think that's one of the biggest challenges. In my specific area, which is analytics, and it's very nuanced, but we tend to be pretty good at getting this across. There's certain metrics that are continuous. A movie, it was really bad, it was sort of bad, it was okay, it was pretty good, it was great. If you're doing the math wrong, you're just wrong. And so we rarely lose when we're in a competitive situation, but sometimes people will look at my company and say, right now we don't need the Mercedes one, and with all due respect, if anyone's got a Kia, the quote I heard was, we'll just go with a Kia right now. And my point to them is that if you are going after a Kia, you can actually be wrong. And in analytics, like in medicine, I think the first precept is first do no harm. And I think that sometimes leaders want to check a box around analytics. Okay, I did this, I did that, not really appreciate that there's a step function between right and wrong as opposed to a continuous.
Let's pursue this just a little more. So very often we think of leaders as being very intuitive people, people who are visionary, that do things that the market says they don't need, but people like Steve Jobs say they will need it. So what are some of the biggest challenges you have with leaders of these huge successful companies on this topic of intuition versus data?
Hubris. I think it goes to the first point that I made, which is the greatest strength that any leader can have is knowing what you don't know, and so being willing to listen. And fortunately, more often than not, companies now are listening. That if you can use math and data, not to replace gut and intuition, to augment it, that's the way the world's headed. If you can drive a car and probably get from here to there without a GPS system, great. But if you can have a data-driven way of getting from here to there more efficiently, why not? And so making sure that people appreciate that.
Arlie, your observations on maybe the biggest lessons that folks learn about international leadership. And let's take domestic customers first. Folks who work domestically, what are some of the biggest mistakes or misunderstandings they have about leadership in a multinational setting?
Gosh, domestically, I think that one problem that we continue to have is thinking about things in terms of a just-in-time economy. And how many times do you need to keep learning the lesson that you can't put all your eggs in one basket, you can't, you can't build a perfect system where as the store shelves are being emptied, there's a truck on the way to replenish the supply. So I think that's something I've noticed, over the past decade in terms of that kind of mindset.
So the just-in-time inventory concept has been around for a couple of decades.
Exactly.
It makes a lot of sense.
It makes a lot of sense.
But what's I'm looking at Caroline and you, and we'll hear from both. When you got a big ocean in between those two places, what do leaders need to remember about the just-in-time inventory concept?
Well, the global supply chain's an end-to-end system. So, I mean, there's all kinds of variables, geopolitical variables, the strength of the dollar, weather, things like that. But I mean, we've got a perfect example now where the supply chain is being rejiggered because over the past several years, some of these shipping lines that have not done well in quite a while are still trying to make a go of being in the black and creating a profit margin in an industry that has over the past 10 to 20 years undercut itself so much that they're not able.
How so?
Well, just underpricing. There's a certain amount of money that it takes to ship a box of container of goods from Shanghai to the U.S., to the port of LA. It's typically around $2,000, but when you look at the cost fluctuations of the cost of shipping that container over the last 8 years, I mean, very seldom was it above $2,000. Most of the time it was below, and so we have this, consumer corporate culture here where the buyers and the cargo owners from the Targets and the Walmarts are aggressively trying to lower that cost margin of manufacturing a product, perhaps overseas, and shipping it through here, and the shipping lines have taken it on the chin in terms of running a business where they're going to have a profit margin from moving the box from point A to point B. So a few years ago, what they started doing was looking at using larger ships to make it more economical, to get more economies of scale. If you have a larger ship, it's a little more modern. It's gonna the fuel cost is going to be less. You can put more boxes on that ship, and the slot cost per box is going to be less. And boy, if we can do that, we'll be able to ink out, a margin on our profitability. And what's happened is that now we have this influx of larger ships coming into service, and many more coming. And typically, the largest ships in the world go from Asia to Europe, and they're very large. They can be 15, 17,000 20-foot unit boxes, TEUs we call them. Very, very large ships. So what's happening is we're seeing a cascade of the Asia-Europe ships coming into the Trans-Pacific market. Typically, at our port, the largest ships we would handle would be around 8,000 TEUs, 8,000 20-foot equivalent, 8,000 containers on a ship. And now we're seeing, 10, 13,000 TEUs. So you see this ripple in the supply chain, and what happens is these big ships, there's fewer of them, they're coming in, and they're discharging a whole lot more cargo per call, and then, that's creating a challenge for the terminal operators to sort through that cargo. The old way of doing business is not working when you're putting more cargo on the dock. So we have an issue with sorting the cargo. We have an issue with having the equipment, the trailers in particular for those containers, having to have those trailers in the right place so that there's not a trailer shortage, because you can't truck anything out of the port if you don't have any trailers to put the boxes on. So we're seeing that. We're seeing also other factors right now. The Longshore Union has been without a contract since the end of June. The trucking industry is a great example of an industry that has had a very hard time being attractive to operators. If you want to drive a truck and make a good living, it's not very attractive to work for the port, because you're sent down to the port to pick up a box, and it could take you 4 or 6 hours to pick that box up, and you're getting paid per box. So we're seeing this whole ripple in the global logistics chain that's not just happening here, it's happening around the world. And you see similar problems in ports, but like I said earlier, every port has a different set of circumstances. So if you had a weakness to begin with, the big ships are gonna agitate that issue.
So, Caroline, we're near the Port of Los Angeles, as you know, so these things are on our mind, our students' minds, logistics. Further thoughts, just, I know you must work with people who are shipping things and try to make things happen. Further leadership lessons learned about consideration of time.
Yeah, Arlene's talking about the challenges of my poor customers that can't get their product out, but we've talked about supply chain, and I don't know how many of you know what supply chain is. How many of you have talked about or heard about supply chain? Okay. Just want to go into it a little bit
You
more.
can get a little primer on it.
There's different types of supply chain. I mean, historically, that's from the time that you have to outlay money to the time that you collect that money and put it back into your business. And so there's a supply chain of the actual product, you know, so the chain of that product going out, being built, going out, and getting delivered. And then you've got the supply chain of the paperwork, the title transfer, and all of that. And then you've got money. And so you've got all different types of supply chains in there. And so what I talk to small, medium, and large companies about all the time is trying to make that supply chain smaller, to condense that supply chain. So from the time that they have to pay the money out of their own pocket to the time that they get paid from their customers. Try to condense that and make it smaller. So on the receivable side, if they've sold a product to someone, we try to help them get paid faster. Okay? And banks give companies money to cover that time. If you're selling to a big box company, a consumer electronics, and they say we need 30-day terms or 60-day terms, that's 60 days that our client is waiting to get paid to put that money back into their company. So we might give them financing to cover those receivables, make that supply chain a little shorter for them. On the payable side, their suppliers, people that they're buying from. A lot of those small companies get stretched very thin when they're selling to a big box person. They have to spend a lot of money buying it, holding it in inventory to wait to get paid from a big box. And so we help some of those companies get paid faster. So it's all about trying to condense that supply chain, rather that be through electronic transmission or transferring documents faster to help people get paid, or just giving financing tools. So it's all about supply chain now. You know, you're talking about the 3PLs and the just-in-time delivery, so that's getting the product there faster. But, you know, it's always about not paying for something too early and getting paid sooner from your customers. So supply chain is the hot thing that's going on.
Excellent. John, I see this has triggered some thoughts.
I was just going to say, 3D printing, that takes care of everything.
Oh, yeah.
Just print everything in your garage.
I think they do that at SpaceX.
You can't print money.
I was just at SpaceX, and they
You just print what they
You
want.
can't print money.
That's right. Well, actually, you probably could, but if you get caught, you're in trouble.
We have some excellent questions. In an increasingly global business world, what advice can you give to future graduates on how to compete for jobs and leadership positions? John?
I think that because it's getting so crowded, whether it's getting into university or getting your first job, standing out, understanding that there's a lot of other people who are probably similarly qualified. And I don't know if I can give you lots of specifics, whether it's community service or something that you've done that is unique or ambitious. Knowing somebody, getting letters of recommendation, sometimes people feel reticent to do that, but if you don't, somebody else will. So, short of walking in with a clown outfit or something to an interview, but doing something that's going to make sure that people can see that you're different and that you're unique.
Someone you've hired in the last year, that what did they do that was very unique, do you think, in their presentation? Aside from letters of reference or a comm suit?
I'm going to have to think about it for a second.
Okay. Did someone actually come in with a clown suit, John? Did someone ever come in with a clown suit?
I actually did have a meeting recently with somebody who did have a clown. It's a company called 2-Bit Circus, and we went along with their corporate
I love it.
I would say internships is a really important way to get some skill sets. Also, looking at what your transferable skills are, you know, something that you learn that you can apply to a job market. I do mentoring for students sometimes, or recent grads, and the people that I know that have been successful have taken the time to do job shadowing and to come in and actually take the time to see what's done in the workplace and also learn a little bit. So even if they don't have those skills, they'll know something about it.
It sounds like you've mentored a fair amount of people in your time. What are the things that you need to remind recent college graduates about in terms of transferable skills? It may be hard for them to think through or to imagine how things they've done are transferable. What are some of the things you remind them of or ask them to reconsider?
Well, Well, I think a lot of students make the mistake of thinking that if they've taken a class or studied the coursework, that they're ready to go into the workplace. And they also aren't ready to go into that entry-level position. And sometimes you have to start someplace and get some skills. I have recent college grads, and you know, even going into a temp agency now, if you don't have 2 years of work experience, they don't want to talk to you, even if you have a college degree, and that's kind of disappointing. But you really have to have practical knowledge, and I know at Bank of America Merrill Lynch, we hire a lot of people, we have a lot of job openings, but at a busy place like that, people don't want to take the time to train anybody. They want you to hit the ground running. If you come into a position, they want you to not only know how to do the job, but have done it before, and might have some clients you can bring over with you. So in the past, where they were willing to bring people in and spend a year training, they've learned that a lot of people will come in and learn and are just boosting their resume to take that next job. And so they don't want to take the time to train, and they don't have to at this point.
So a word of experience. John said being something unique, distinctive. Harley, what else would you offer to our students who are about to graduate or who are thinking about graduating, in addition to those two things?
Well, you know, we have a lot of students that come and take tours, a lot of groups that come down and take tours of the port. And I think that the one thing about global trade that I'd impress upon you is that when you meet people like John or Caroline, try to figure out, you know, take their card and try to figure out where they fit in the scheme of things. You know, because it's such a varied landscape of you know, it's logistics, it's finance, it's entrepreneurial, it's so many different things, and I think that if you're wanting to move into the industry, the best thing you can do is to try and around to put those pieces together, because that when you're able to do that, you're able to articulate to someone that is a hiring manager and you're there for a job, they're looking at you know, how much you know of the landscape you know.
Yeah, John.
And if you're talking about sort of interviews, I would augment that by saying do your research, know who's interviewing you, learn about the company. People that are conducting the interviews are human beings too, and if there's things that you learn about them that are relatable, not to the point of being creepy, but I think that's really important. I remember when I was graduating.
Give us some examples
of creepy. I can probably give you a couple. But I mean, I remember when I was first applying for a job when I graduated. I was, as I mentioned, a lawyer. I went and looked for all the law firms that had people who graduated from Harvard, which is where I graduated from. I looked at people who had similar backgrounds. I was an engineer by training, and so I would send resumes into people that had some level of commonality. Most good schools and universities, people have some sense of loyalty, and I found that, and I went to Berkeley, and when I see a Berkeley grad, I have a warm, you know, spot in my heart for it, and so I think, again, doing research ahead of an interview to show that you care, I think is really important.
So research, really thinking through your experience beforehand, and Arlene, going back to experience, you have one of our students interning in your shop, right? What is he? Without naming names, I know it's Orange County. He's a great kid. What has he learned? Do you think about the work world? He comes to Marymount. He's actually a filmmaker.
Yeah.
And who would ever have thought that he ends up working at the Port of LA?
Well, he didn't come to learn how to make films at the Port of LA. What's interesting is that he has had a knack of editing on Apple computers since he was 12 or 13. So I think that's an example of the millennial spirit, where you know you're learning programming, you know, you're learning how to build a website, and that's amazing. What I think that he's learning at the port is that he can take you know, his technical skills, and he can go out and he can help us tell that story. And we give him, we assign him maybe a story every week, or at least a story every 2 weeks. He'll go out, and typically the story will take a day of shooting, and then and he's not a full-time, you know, student for us, but he'll spend some time editing, and it's amazing that his knack of storytelling is really coming together. And that's something that, you know, even if you're the best editor in the world, if you don't know how to tell the story and just take all, you know, that certain amount of sound bites and put it into something, then it's all for nothing. So that's what he's learning.
So working while you're getting a degree, interning while you're getting a degree, being distinctive, and to John's point, doing research on people you're meeting with. John, next question. How have the different cultures you've worked with, international cultures you've worked with, adjusted or changed your leadership style?
I think it's just being more receptive and understanding that, as I said, you have to listen better. You can't make assumptions that things that you've learned in your day-to-day life, if you've not worked in a heavily multicultural environment, are things that the real world, especially when you're dealing in any sort of international trade, is just different. So I think it's made me just be more receptive, more thoughtful about what I'm saying and hearing, and similarly trying to communicate the other direction as best I can, as clearly and as articulately as I can.
John, you've spent a couple of decades in some very fast-paced, very pressurized situations. How do you?
I'm 27 years old.
Is that
That's
right?
what it said to me.
I like your socks.
Thank you. It's because I don't like to wear shoes in the office, so I wear.
That's your rebellion?
That's it, exactly.
How do you? I'm really, as a colleague, how do you create that space for listening? I mean, for truly listening and trying to understand what people are saying. When you live a very fast-paced life. How do you create that space for yourself?
I think it's just, it's playing back to the people. That's one of the sort of communication styles, is when you get done hearing something, you repeat it back and say, did I understand that correctly? And then, again, going the other direction, I just want to make sure that, you know, what I said was clear. And that could be in a very good, productive conversation. It could be, I recently had a conversation with somebody that I wasn't thrilled with on the other side of the deal. And I said, I just want to make sure, is this what you're saying? Because I'm going to go to your boss when we're done. But I just think being much more cognizant of it.
Caroline, again, you've worked, you thought Sacramento was going to be quiet, and ended up being really busy. You worked in a lot of different settings, governmental and private. What did you learn? What's changed about your leadership style from your international work?
As John said, being an active listener is really important. You can't just go out and do the same thing over and over again for every situation. It just won't work. And so you have to be a good listener and adapt what you already know, some of the things you've experienced in the past, but just adapt it to different situations depending on who the company is, what they're looking for, what their interests are, what their concerns are, because it's going to vary every time. And if you go in there trying to handle everything the same way, it just doesn't work. So you have to be willing to adapt.
Listen, you're ready to adapt, to know when to adapt.
Very important.
Arlene, is something you've learned from your international work that's changed your leadership style? Or has you've noticed a change over the last decade or so?
Well, I think depending on where you're going in the world, people have a certain impression about Americans, and you have to be sensitive to that as well.
Such as?
Yeah, you know, it can be Americans or capitalists or loud or, you know, boisterous, and I think that you have to understand, you know, to the extent you can, if you're going into a city, read about it. Read about, you know, the cultural dynamics. Read about the free trade agreement that we have with that nation. I mean, it's interesting when you look at how many years it takes put together a free trade agreement, with, South Korea, for example, or we're developing a number of free trade agreements or reigniting them in Latin America. But there are sensitive points about trade that you should know if you're going to go into a country and talk about trade.
I had a meeting today with some Brits, and so I don't know if you can see out there, but here's my American flag, and here's my Union Jack somewhere here on my cufflink, so they appreciated that.
Did you notice that?
I closed the deal.
So it's that kind of thing. You never know what baggage you're gonna bring to the table just by virtue of the company or the country that you're coming from. You have to be very cognizant of that.
Do any of you work with enterprise in or for or with Africa? Caroline?
We have clients that deal with, we have clients that sell products all over the world, especially in agriculture, and certainly Africa is an important market, certainly in
We have a student who
environment.
has an interest in working there in Africa at some point.
Yeah.
Any leadership observations about
I mean, there are a lot of special opportunities for clients that are interested in Africa. I think it was 2010, the president enacted the National Export Initiative to double U.S. exports in 5 years, and as part of that, a lot of different agencies put together different programs, and there is a whole Africa initiative, and a lot of it has to do with renewable energy, whether it be wind power or solar, and so there are lots of opportunities for financing, USAID, there's just a lot of different groups that are focused on Africa, especially in renewables.
in terms of investment?
Yes, investment and trade.
John? You must have companies that do business in Africa.
Well, I'm on the board of UNICEF, so we do a lot of stuff in Africa.
Exactly.
But also, I'm pretty good friends with the congresswoman who is leading those initiatives you talked about. And if somebody wanted me to make an introduction, can't make any promises, but take advantage, I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you, John. Specific questions for some of you. John, how did you know law school was right for you, given your math science background? And what attracted you? What motivated you to get to Harvard Law School? I guess why?
Why? It's gonna sound, the reason I went to law school is not because I wanted to be a lawyer, it's because I wanted to get into public service.
Is that right?
Yeah, so when I grow up, I mean, I do a lot of that now. I'm very involved in the city of LA, and was, I don't know, we don't talk politics, but I was involved in a couple of presidential campaigns and mayoral campaigns. And so law school was, I thought, a good foundation for that, and then also a good foundation for business. So it wasn't, I didn't have a passion for going and fighting with people in court.
Mayor Garcetti has appointed you to serve as the president of a commission in Los Angeles. Can you tell us about that work and maybe how your Harvard Law experience plays out there?
Sure, I'm the president of the Convention Center and Tourism Board. So very involved in things ranging from, we're going to futurize is the term we use, the convention center. We're going to rebuild the convention center over the next handful of years. And we're working on getting a football stadium and then all the stuff that goes along with tourism, really actively trying to get people to appreciate the Los Angeles region, not the municipality. One of the other things that the mayor's charged me with is what he calls sort of rebranding the city, because when people think of Los Angeles, people typically think, and we did a study around this, think about Hollywood and the beaches, which are great, unique attributes that we have, but we have 105 museums, we're the top city in the country for contemporary art. We have, I think the Bon Appetit said the best new restaurant in the country last year was in downtown LA. We have more tech jobs in LA. Then I'm going to go down the list. So a big focus of what I'm doing and how that relates to law school, other than both as an engineer and a lawyer, you kind of think about problem solving in a sort of semi-methodical, linear way.
Sounds like the mayor found the right person, though. I'd say.
We'll see.
Arlie, here's a question. How do you feel about working with talent in regards to public relations and placing them in the right situations? You must have a lot of folks coming out of school who are interested in working in PR. How do you work with them, either support or as a mentor?
I think that I don't really interact too much with people coming out of school unless they're referred to me. But
People early on in their career, other
yeah,
professions.
you know, it's more of someone coming to me and trying to articulate what they're interested in doing. I think, you know, like global trade, public relations is something that's so vast. I mean, you're communicating for any kind of industry around. So I think one of the big challenges for young people when they set out to pursue a career in public relations is trying to find out what their niche is, you know, and really, because if it's not what you want to do, well, you know, we tend to get out of school and we get jobs that the jobs that were available. I graduated in 1989, and that was just going into a recession, and there wasn't a lot of job availability. So, you know, I was unemployed for 6 months, and then I, you know, got a job at an agency, and you know, a lot of the account work that I did, I wasn't really interested in it. It didn't motivate me personally, and I think that that's a big thing for young people. You know, you're given a job, you go after, you get your job, and it's by trial and error that you have to figure out what you want to do, and the sooner that you can really dial in and understand what your passion is, the better off you're going to be. I had a buddy of mine who was in my career for 10 or 15 years, and we both worked in different parts of the, you know, the advertising industry out here, and he ended up working for the agency that represents Honda. And, you know, he was 15 years into his career, and he had a pretty good job, you know, for Honda. And he just didn't like it. And now he went back to school and became an architect. So, yeah.
Passion.
Yeah, exactly.
Passion.
Yeah, and I think that's the toughest thing, because you get the job that is available, and a lot, and this is a tough market too, because this is, you know, there's a lot of entertainment jobs and things like that, but given that fact, there's also a lot of corporate jobs. You just have to really try to dial in and figure out what it is that you want to do.
Carolina, we've heard a lot about leadership attributes and our theories about leadership, mostly towards the affirmation, the forward-looking. We haven't talked much about leadership and conflict resolution. What are your observations? You've had an amazing career, both public and private, international, domestic. What are some of the things, what are some of the patterns you've noticed about leaders who have a good ability to resolve conflict?
Well, that's a challenging one. It's always something to work towards. And I think, again, it sounds redundant, but being a good listener, and then being able to not necessarily focus on the conflict, but being able to figure out what their actual concerns are, get past all the passion and the heat or whatever's around the situation.
What's the hard part of that?
Sometimes you have to just take yourself out of it, the emotion out of it, because people react to that and you want to defend yourself, or maybe sometimes get confrontational. But I think it's just being able to sit back and figure out kind of what are the issues that are outstanding, what can you agree on, you know, what are some of the issues, what are some of the things that they feel strongly about, where can you negotiate, and just finding ways to work together, or even sometimes acknowledge that we'll agree to disagree on certain things, but still having a professional working relationship.
Excellent advice. You all work in international settings. How do you, and earlier, at least one of you mentioned keeping track of the geopolitical. we're all so busy. Caroline, when you wake up in the morning or later on in the day as you get going, what do you do to get caught up on things that are geopolitical that might impact your clients? What are the things that you do to keep on top of geopolitical occurrences, events, issues? What's important for you to keep on top of that?
I think you have to check different sources, but it's a constant effort,
Exactly.
Whether it's listening to NPR on the radio on my way to work or talking to some of my colleagues overseas. And, we're a global bank, and so we actually have people on the ground in 32 countries. And so we are one bank, and so a lot of times it's 5 a.m. conference calls or it's 5:30 p.m. conference calls, but actually kind of keeping your hand on the pulse of what's going on, talking to my clients. That's how we find out what's going on at the port and how it's impacting them. Just really talking to companies in different industries, but looking different places. Don't go one place all the time.
So different sources and going to local sources.
Oh, absolutely.
John?
And one thing we didn't touch on today, but there's, of course you guys are working to get your education. That's a great foundation, but the power of networking, you can't replace that. The people that you meet, get to know them. You never know when you'll need them or when they'll be able to make a key introduction or help you in a struggle. So, take those relationships seriously and, get involved. There's lots of trade organizations here locally through chambers of commerce or local organizations. Take those opportunities as a student to get involved because those relationships will serve you well later.
So networking is not just about your personal career, it's about who you can return to for
Yeah.
real good feedback.
Every job is a good job. You don't know where you'll start. If you kind of go across this panel and ask what was your first job, it's not where we are now. I was in high school and I paid checks and counted out statements when I was a part-time student at USC. How that led me where I am now, who knows, but every job I did well, and I worked towards it, and who knows who's watching or what opportunities I'm preparing myself for, but being ready for that opportunity, being prepared for that opportunity is what's important.
Being adaptable, being prepared, being open. John?
The second part around relationships, I totally agree with one caveat. I think you would say this as well, which is it's not a one-way street, which is, when you can help somebody else, it's around the world, to use the second cliche. And it comes back. So when you can take the time to help somebody do it, and again, it'll pay off in space. What was the first?
Do you find, are there times, just building on Caroline's comments, are there times when you need to call someone across the world to find out what's happening locally in terms of a geopolitical event?
Yeah, in terms of the geopolitics, personally, it's a passion of mine. So I'm
Also,
I want to get into more deeply involved in public service, and so understanding what's going on around the world, and whether it's in Europe or the Middle East or things going on in South America, and both sides of our border. So how do I do it? I do a lot. I get a lot of reading. I read everything, and I think Caroline made a very good point. I will read Direct Report, and I'll read the Huffington Post, and I'll listen to MSNBC and Fox News. I read a lot of.
why is that? Why do you do it?
Because at the end of the day, facts can be presented in lots of different ways, and so seeing those facts through a lot of different lenses and then coming to your own conclusion, I think is important. And it's not just the online media; the print media is very important. Things like The Economist, I think are important.
Sounds like there's a case for our students who are here in Mary Mountain, in a sense, for a well-rounded education, but also they're here for critical thinking, developing critical thinking skills.
Yeah, and through YPO, we often get exposed to speakers with very unique, YPO is Young Presidents Organization. We get exposed to speakers from all over the world, a lot of the things in politics. I personally am also involved in the Pacific Council on international policy, and so you get a pretty good sense of what's going on out there.
Arlie, you have a couple of young kids, so how do you possibly keep on top of geopolitics? Because you got to get them off to school in the morning.
Thank God for iPads. And there's no more excuse. You have the Wall Street Journal, you have the New York Times, whatever you need. It's I was at a campground this morning. We went camping and just got back this afternoon, and I'll wake up and read my Wall Street Journal. You know, and if you're if you're interested in the global landscape and geopolitics, you have to read the Wall Street Journal, The Economist, the New York Times. That's where you're learning about the trends, and the trends can start just by the valuation of the dollar, or the price of steel in a certain country. So those are things that you have to look at, and then because I'm a media relations practitioner, I'm also looking at USA Today has a very cogent way of covering a snapshot of an industry in 5 minutes or less. But it's a very widely circulated newspaper, and then of course you have to look at the newspaper that in your market, the LA Times. LA is a very unique market. Global Trade's a great example. Most Angelenos don't know that this is the largest trade gateway in the Western Hemisphere, that 40% of all the stuff that's going into the US is coming in through these two ports here. People don't know because we live in a society where you're just bombarded with entertainment stuff, Kim Kardashian, things like that, a lot of pop culture kind of stuff. And then, so you have the entertainment industry, you have tourism, but there's almost 1 million people in Southern California that make a living some way in global trade, and that's pretty powerful. And those are good jobs too.
Thank you, Ron. We're going to have one more question, but before we do, I want to recognize some folks who helped bring tonight together. Holly and Kelly, if you can stand. Kelly Curry's at the top of the aisle. Holly Maybar, thank you. Of course, we have some of the most important people tonight for us are the camera people, right, who are making sure that we're getting our best sides. Thank you, Noah. All the folks who put together sound and camera, thank you very much. And we've been very lucky tonight to, as usual, present some great role models for our students with our speakers. But every day in the classroom we have other role models. Of course, those are our faculty and staff. And I'd like to ask our faculty and staff to please stand and be recognized. So as we close out with the final question, just a reminder, folks, that after the program you're very welcome to stay and to meet with our speakers or to network. And usually there's some refreshments outside that you can enjoy as well. So please do stay afterwards. Last question is pretty straightforward. Arlene, what did you learn from your colleagues tonight? What did you learn about leadership from this conversation from your colleagues?
Well, I didn't learn enough about John. You have a very interesting background that transcends a number of interesting cornerstones of this market in particular. And what's nice about this is a great example about global trade. I met Caroline. We were both on the board of the International Business Association, probably 5 years ago. So I met when she tells you. This is a very close knit community. So if you do have a desire to get into global trade, you can't think of a better market to do it in here, because you've got the intellectual property here, you've got the freight forwarders, you've got the actual doorstep of global trade coming into the country. So everything's here, and that's what makes this gateway such a successful one.
John, what did you learn from your colleagues tonight? Things that you were reminded of, or new revelations?
I think that in very disparate industries, there are clearly very common challenges and very common opportunities. So I think that's sort of heartening to know that we're not all snowflakes, that we can learn from each other despite being in very different businesses.
You're here. Caroline, things you're going to take away from tonight from working with your colleagues and helping our students appreciate leadership?
Sure, I think I learned something from some of the students that I met earlier, by the way. You know, they're very interesting and great backgrounds and things that they're interested in doing. But Arlie, I just want to stay abreast of what's going on at the Port and help some of my clients because they're definitely complaining about issues at the Port. And with John, you know, I think there's definitely some synergies there. So I'd love to know more about what you're doing and how we can work with you at Bank of America Maryland. So.
Well, you can see, all you can do, how blessed the university is to have friends like this who come from all over LA to come in and speak with us and really be great resources, hopefully great networking, and also great role models. So please join me in thanking them for coming